Charles Miller. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for the invite, man.
So I want to go back to your time as an Uber driver. How long ago was that? How has things evolved since then? And what were some of your favorite failures along the way that helped propel you to what you're doing now?
So the Uber days were late in college. I was on the 6 year plan in college. I did not get a master's degree. I was just awful at it. So I was Uber driving through college. And then once I got finished, I was obsessed with the idea of being self employed, even though I was not very good at it yet. So I did that to try and pay the bills. So that was like from 2016 to 2018 or so. During that period, I started three e-commerce stores. First one got shut down by Etsy because I was not selling handmade goods. Second one lost about $10,000. Third one lost about $20,000. So bunch of failures in a row. That was like over a 2 year period. And then I was so broke at one point that I was like, all right, I can't do self employment. I'm going to get a job. I'm going to try to figure this out like in a while, like in a couple of years. And I started freelance writing while I was applying to jobs just so I could make a tiny bit of extra money. Ended up becoming, you know, successful enough as a blog post writer that I didn't end up having to get a job. I started with blog posts and then I went from there.
What do you think allowed you to have that success when it came to posting on blogs?
So I was decent at writing in high school and college. I was never like an A student, but I did well enough that I had a bit of a foundation of skills. And then I think it was mostly just showing up every day and actually getting in front of potential clients. So early on, I did Upwork. I'm not a big fan of Upwork anymore, but that was the first method I had for getting clients. And I just decided, every day I'm going to log on, I'm going to look at all the jobs on the board and I'm going to apply to 20 of them every single day, no matter what. So that was the biggest factor. I was okay at writing, good, not great, maybe, probably mediocre, to be honest. The biggest thing was just showing up every day and getting in front of clients and then eventually getting hired by a couple of them.
What do you wish you knew then that you know now? Like if you could go back and have a conversation with that kid, what would that conversation look like? What type of things would you tell them?
That conversation would probably be about 4 hours long, just telling myself I'm an idiot. I'll try to do a couple. Number one, physical products are difficult to sell profitably online, especially when you have no budget. So it's not a bad business model. It works for tons and tons of people, obviously. But when I had very little money and I was spending almost all of it on buying products, that was, you know, almost disastrous financially for me. So I would say uh, fit your offer to your budget. If you don't have a lot of money, choose a service offer, choose an informational offer. If you can code, choose a coding offer, but create something that you can create for cheap. I would also recommend to myself to create something that was relatively expensive. So again, if you're selling products for $30, $40, it's difficult to make a living that way. If you're selling a service for 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 a month, it's a lot easier. So I would be focusing on finding the right offer for my budget and my skill set and what my vision is for the future.
And for that person that was in your shoes back then, how should they go about thinking about creating that offer and creating something a little more high ticket that will actually be worth people's time and money?
Yeah, I would start with the outcome. So if you've chosen an audience, think about what does this type of person or type of business want the most, and then what can I build that gets them that. So rather than saying, I want to sell writing or I want to sell graphic design, say what does the business want most? Maybe that's they want more leads. So say, okay, I'm going to build an offer that gets them more leads and directly increases their profit. So I would say start with the outcome and then reverse engineer it from there.
What was that outcome for you when you were getting started? What did that look like?
I mean, it took me years to even think about that. Like, unfortunately, was not a big content consumer when I started, and I just learned by like screwing things up for 6 months at a time and then realizing I made a mistake. So, if you're selling a service, I think the most common outcome is more profit. Sometimes it can be time savings. So start with one of those foundations and then go from there. Once I kind of figured this out, uh, I was doing email marketing. The outcome was, profit from email. So that was a pretty simple one.
And what are you doing now? What does that look
Um,
like? What's your main focuses?
so about, I want to say 18 months ago, I pivoted to personal brand growth, mostly for CEOs and entrepreneurs. And one of the reasons why is that I've been creating content for years and years. So it's very easy for me to, I'm creating for myself, then I can create for other people. It's the same exact skill set. And I also just have the advantage of having pretty large followings myself and knowing a lot of people who also have large followings that I can, use for distribution and things like that.
It's interesting, and for a while you were somewhat anonymous. You could correct me on that, but tell me about that decision to switch to more of a personal brand versus an aura.
I've always been a pretty private person, which is not what you would expect given that I, work so publicly. But I just like didn't want my face out there. I wasn't like scared per se, but I just preferred to not. And I wanted to make it work without that. And then over the years, I just came to realize it's such an advantage to have the name and the face that people can, remember and trust. And the very simple decision I made is I would like to make more money. So let me just put a picture of myself up here, and it's, nothing has changed. It's not a big deal at all.
Yeah, has that hasn't changed anything on your end?
No, I mean, I'm selling more things, especially like consultations and stuff that is, beyond an offer like beyond a cheap ebook, a lot easier to sell. But yeah, nothing has really changed.
Awesome. So yeah, let's dive into what you do now in terms of helping people build that audience and grow on social. It's not something that we're taught, and it's not always the easiest thing to understand how to go about that. What's that? What do those steps look like for somebody? They come to you, they're not big on social media, and they want to start growing and building a following. What does that look like?
So the very first thing is you have to figure out what their ultimate goal is, what their desired outcome is. And they might have a couple, but you want to get the main one and maybe one or two secondaries. So uh, sometimes I'll work with like a venture capitalist who has no real financial incentive in terms of like getting customers or clients. They just want to be like low level internet famous so that they can get more deals and just like, go into negotiations and just be like, hey, I'm, you know, mildly famous on Twitter or I'm mildly famous on LinkedIn. So for that person, we're mostly looking at just racking up followers, not creating the most generic content possible. We want to make it, everything a little bit unique with personality. But for them, it's just followers. And then sometimes I'll have an agency owner come to me like, hey, I want email marketing clients. So for that person, I'm going to do a lot more in depth, like breakdowns, case studies, more social proof, because the ultimate goal is getting clients rather than the ultimate goal being getting followers. So, step number one is deciding exactly what you want. Do you want a job? Do you want clients? Do you want customers? Do you just want a bunch of followers? And then you can craft the plan from there.
It's interesting. And for those people, like, what's the difference there between if they were going to do that on their own versus you? Like, in terms of the writing, what does that look like when you see a beginner trying to write on Twitter? What are some common mistakes that they make? And what are some things that you've learned along the way in regards to writing well for the 280 characters there are on Twitter?
Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes people make is they just do their best impression of like their favorite content creator. So they're not copying, of course, but they are basically just rehashing other people's ideas and not injecting any uniqueness or personality into it. Um, there are also other people who are just very self-centered in the content they create, and they're not thinking about what is my reader, what value is my reader going to get out of this. So I would say those are the two big mistakes. People will just create like content just out of their very simple thoughts that just aren't interesting to anyone besides them. And then other people will try so hard to be appealing to the masses that they end up being very generic. So you have to find something in the middle of those two.
It's so true. And, I think it's Naval Ravikant who has the quote something along the lines of, when you are being yourself, there is no competition because no one
Yeah.
can compete with you at being yourself. And you see so many people on Twitter. I feel like it falls into like two buckets in our side of Twitter. You have the people that want to be like Andrew Tate, and you have the people and you have the people who want to be like Danco. And it's like these two people, it's like everyone's trying to copy these two guys. And it's like, have some, you're never going to beat that guy at that game because you aren't him. You're yourself with your own struggles and things that you've learned along the way, and you have to come up with original type of content and ideas. And how has that been for you in terms of coming up with original concepts?
So it really depends on the client. When I'm writing for clients, for some of them, I don't really have to come up with original concepts because they're just looking for, this mass audience of people who generally like generic content. For other people, I look into their opinions that are like a little bit different than most people. So I want to know, like, what's an opinion you have that's a little bit unpopular? What's something you think that is like, you're a little bit scared to publish? And then the biggest one is just their experiences. So every idea has been around since the beginning of time. People tweet about things that Plato was writing about however long ago. um, what makes it unique is actually relating it to experiences you've had. So you and I can both write about the same concept, and you can talk about something that happened to you when you were a kid, and I can talk about something that happened to me in college, and they're completely unique pieces of content talking about the exact same idea.
It's a great point, and it brings up something that I wanted to touch on with you, which was storytelling and incorporating storytelling into your writing and doing that specifically on Twitter. How does that work? How do you think people should go about thinking of telling stories on Twitter in terms of threads, and what does that look like?
uh, the first thing you want to think about is how you're going to start the story, because the hook of a social media post, the beginning of it, is the most important aspect always. So one way you can do that, the simplest way, is you start at the beginning. But very often it's better to start at the end or in the middle. So like a very basic thing I'll do for clients who have marketing agencies is I'll do the end of the story with some bit of social proof. So it'll start something like, um, I made my client $10 million over Black Friday with email marketing. This is how I did it. So you start with the end or the middle because that's usually more interesting than the very beginning. And then you end up telling the whole story. So the biggest thing is figuring out how to start it, I would say, because that's going to garner the most interest and the most engagement.
That hook is so important, and it's something that I think people really struggle with, is captivating that attention through that. What frameworks do you use to think about creating a good hook?
Um, so I have a whole list of like 25 of these in a document somewhere. Um, there's a lot of ways you can approach it. I think the most common one that I've used uh, I've used that one I just said a lot, where you have some sort of personal result or client result or customer result, and then you relate it to the reader so they actually read the rest of it. Simple how to's have been really good for me. How to do X, lists are good. 7 reasons why you should do Y. So it's a bit hard to talk about hooks as a whole, besides, you want them to be concise and interest creating, but there are so many strategies you can do. Um, I would generally say, yeah, be concise and be direct. It's difficult to create a bunch of interest by like not approaching it directly. Very skilled writers can do that sometimes, but you generally just want to say like, hey, this is what you're about to get. Try to make that as interesting as possible, and then get right into the body of the content.
And that balance between, it's interesting in terms for you writing for clients and writing for yourself. Is there any difference there, and how do you balance that in terms of what are you focusing on? Are you more concerned about your personal brand or about creating content for clients? How do you balance the two?
So I'm not interested in scaling past where I am right now, at least for the moment. So I'll work with 7 to maybe 9 people at a time. So just like time wise, that works very well for me. I don't feel like I don't have enough time for my own stuff. Yeah, that all works out very well. And I have one writer who I work with part time who helps me out, so that's a little bit easier. Um, to answer your question, I think it goes back to what we were originally talking about, what the end goal is. So my goal is to keep that level of clients, build my email list, sell my digital product. So I'm creating content based off of those outcomes. And then every client, I have a list of what their main outcomes they want are. So if I go to write for them, I'm looking at that list and I'm adjusting the style just a little bit based on what they want.
And you mentioned your newsletter there. What type of role has that played? It's something that I'm seeing people, it seems like everyone now is starting to try and develop a newsletter. What role has that played, and who do you think a newsletter is right for?
So the biggest reason to have a newsletter, I think, is insurance. So when you have a social media account, it can get taken away from you at any point. There can also be algorithmic changes. Your account can just like, I've seen people's accounts basically just die for no reason. Like their engagement goes almost to zero, even though nothing has changed. So when you're operating on social media accounts, the famous cliche is that you're renting those followers. You don't have them. Um, when you have an email list, you actually own that list. You can back it up in Google Drive or whatever, and you have access to those people always. So the biggest thing is just insurance against social media accounts becoming lower quality, or stopping growth or whatever it is. Um, from a more applicable perspective, it's a really good way to reach your biggest fans. So on social media, you might get one post will be seen by 2 or 5 or 10% of your followers. Um, if you have an email list that you manage well, you can get 30, 40, even 50+%. So it's a great way where you take people who want to hear from you most, and then now you have their information forever, and you can send them a message, and there's a very good chance they're going to open it basically every single time.
And in terms of growing that newsletter, what has that looked like for you? Is that mainly just through social and just posting it in the bio, quote tweeting it at times, or commenting it at times? Is there anything else you do to try to build that following?
One thing I've been doing recently that I think is important is talking about it more. So I've got it, in my bio. The website in my bio is the goes to my newsletter, and I have like a little mini pitch in my social media bios too. But just relying on that, um, it doesn't get me the numbers I quite need. So something I've been doing lately, making a point of, is just plugging it more on social media. So like giving people a reason to join it. So you like tease what you're going to write about the next day and like, post a link, join, and you can get that email. So just besides just having it in your bio, I would say talk about it more and make sure you're building desire in your audience to actually be a part of it. And you can do that mostly by talking about the awesome things you're putting in it and making them feel like they're missing out for not subscribing.
And what person should think about creating a newsletter? Where in the journey should people start thinking about adding that into their repertoire?
It's a tough one because different people have different goals, but the very rough answer I would give is somewhere around like 10 to 20,000 followers. Once you get to that level, clearly you have some demand for the information you're putting out, and it will actually be worth your time to funnel them into a newsletter. I see people starting newsletters when they have 1,000 followers, and I think that's just not a good use of time because let's say you write it once a week. Um, there's a very good chance you're going to be getting fewer than 5, 10 subscribers every week. So pump up your social media numbers more, I would say 10, 20,000 or so, and then you can think about doing that.
And pumping up those numbers, getting to that point of 10 to 20,000, it's not the easiest thing in the world. And I think a lot of people feel lost in that journey of getting to that point. What's the best advice that you have for those people who are 300 followers in and you can't see it?
Yeah, I'll give you two. So number one, you need to have some sort of plan. So maybe your first plan is not going to be very good. That's fine. You need to have a daily plan that you're executing every day or close to every day. And that's going to reduce anxiety and it's going to just give you a feeling of certainty. Like, I'm waking up today, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. So it'd be something like, we'll use Twitter, for example. Every day I'm going to post 2 tweets. I'm going to reply to 30 other creators. I'm going to send 3 DMs to, people I respect, something like that. So just having that list and checking it off every day is going to help a lot. The second thing I'll say is very early on, you want to lean on networking more than creation. So you have to be creating content, of course, but if nobody's seeing it, it's a bit of wasted time besides just getting better because not a lot of people are going to get exposed to that. So I'd be focusing on the replies, focusing on DMs, and focusing on creating little unofficial partnerships with people. Like, we're going to help each other out a little bit by engaging with each other's stuff.
How should people go about thinking about networking? I find that some of the DMs I get from people, and I have like 900 followers. It's not like I'm a big account, but it just seems like people are very needy and they go about it in a weird way that it's very inauthentic. How can people think about creating those more authentic, more genuine relationships on this app?
I mean, the biggest thing is just putting ego aside and realizing that you're talking to another human being who wants things probably completely different than you want, and making an effort to, um, deliver more value than you're trying to take away. So, like if you're doing cold outreach and trying to get clients, that's fine. You can, be straight up that you're selling something. But if you're looking to build a network and maybe soft sell things, at the very least, be complimentary. Don't ask for free favors, free conversations, whatever it might be. Give them a compliment, just like say you like their stuff. That's like the bare minimum. And then if you can deliver something more applicably value, do that. So, like, there are probably 5, 10 people I've added to my network just because they found a typo on my website and told me about it. I'm so bad with typos, ironically. Uh, so people, I've had people come up and say, "Hey, you misspelled this word on your website. Just want to let you know." And like, that's an instant follow back. You actually gave me something that I can use. I've had people come up, be like, "Hey, I, did this graphic design for you. I turned your tweet into an Instagram post. Feel free to use that." So at the very least, be valuable in just that you're not trying to take from somebody and you're just like a friendly, person, normal human being. And then if you have a skill or something, you can actually give somebody applicable value.
Yeah, adding that value there is such an important note. Like I had someone DM me and they created like 5 pieces of content from the podcast in terms of clips. And it's like immediately I'm going to feel indebted to that person. I'm going to give them a follow. I'm probably going to pay them and help them out and make them a part of what I'm doing. So yeah, just starting with value there and being value focused is it's so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
How should people think about creating value in terms of like let's say they they want to start creating these relationships and they don't know how they can be of service to another creator. What are some things that you think people should think about?
Probably the first step is developing some sort of skill or having some sort of asset that you can offer people. So again, you can deliver very low level value just by being friendly and not trying to take from people. If you want to level up from there, having some sort of skill like copywriting, like graphic design, or having some sort of asset like you're connected with, X person and you can connect whoever you're DMing with that person. So the easiest way is probably to develop some sort of skill. And then the harder way, but is good too, is having some kind of asset you can share with them. Like, you have a following or you have connections or whatever else that you can help people out with.
And you mentioned a little while ago cold outreach. Is that something that you've done at all? Have you experimented with that?
Yeah, before I was writing online, I did a lot of cold email. Um, I would have done LinkedIn as well if I, felt like making a LinkedIn account. I have, in the last 2 years, but early on, I was like, I don't want to deal with that. But yeah, cold outreach is really good. It's very difficult to get clients when you're creating content with a small following. Once you have the large following, you can get inbound. That's what I do now. I basically only do inbound. I haven't done cold outreach in probably a year plus, but very early on, it's definitely a profitable thing to do. It's probably the easiest way to raise your online income early on is having a service offer and doing solid cold outreach to get clients.
How can people do solid cold outreach?
Um, Number one is don't make it look like the corniest sales pitch of all time. I
That's a
get
great
like
message.
I get like 15, 20 of these a day. So I have a lot to pull from. Um, if I see that there's this interesting concept, I call it the like innate spam filter. So there are spam filters like on email hosts, like Gmail and whatever else. But every person also has a spam filter just like in their brain. So if somebody triggers my spam filter with their cold outreach, I don't even read the entire message. And what does that is, words in all caps, like very corny sales pitches, like, they'll like ask a question and then like, would you like to explode your profits by 10,000%? Like just like major like jargon, kind of like very low level copywriting, long messages, words in all caps, lots of dollar signs, things like that. So if you're sending like long cliche sales pitches, for me at least, and from the data I have from when I used to do cold outreach, that's not going to work well. You want to make it as conversational as possible without it being um, like a waste of time for the person you're talking to. So you have to find this balance where you're not being super sales heavy, but you're also not wasting people's time or concealing what you're trying to do. So on one side of that spectrum, you have the really corny sales pitch that I'm going to skip every time. On the other side of the spectrum, you have people who just say hi or how are you. Um, I would love to, I would love to meet all of you, but I'm not going to, you know, go through 9 messages with you before you get to the point. So show that you're, probably selling something. Don't be corny about it. Be conversational. So when I was doing this for ghostwriting, I had two basic templates I used. One was a personalized first line, like a compliment about their content or something like that. I would ask them a quick question, and then I would close it off by, call to action to answer the question. And the other one I used was literally just a question. It was, have you ever considered using a ghostwriter? So both of those, it's clear that I'm selling a ghostwriting slash growth service, but they're very short, they're very conversational, they're very easy to reply to.
That is a great point there. And LinkedIn seems to be a great avenue for people who are interested in cold outreach. And it does seem like, in a weird way, it's a secret weapon in terms of building an audience. What has your experience been with LinkedIn, and how can people use it?
My experience has been awesome with LinkedIn. I would actually say it's the more important platform for me than Twitter now,
Wow.
even though think I have like 60,000 on LinkedIn and 160,000 on Twitter. I'm getting a lot more business off of LinkedIn. And if I had to give up one of those accounts, I would give up my Twitter account in a heartbeat. It wouldn't even be a debate. So LinkedIn has been really, really good for me. I didn't even know people posted content on LinkedIn until about 2 years ago. I did not think it was a content publishing platform. And then I stumbled on Justin Welsh, and I was like, "Oh, this guy's making like 5 million a year on this platform. Let me let me start copy pasting my tweets." So I started with copy pasting tweets. I eventually learned that longer content tends to do better on LinkedIn. So my writing process now is I'll basically write a tweet and then I'll make an extended version of it that's usually about 2 to 3 times as long, and then I'll post that on LinkedIn. So same idea for every post every day, just about. LinkedIn's going to be a little bit longer.
And why do you think it is that LinkedIn has been proved to be so valuable for you?
So there's some algorithmic things that I don't know the specifics of, but I know that LinkedIn distributes my content a lot better than Twitter does at the moment. Um, I think there are fewer content creators on LinkedIn too. Those are probably related. So with less people creating, they're boosting the people who do create more. Um, People are also just like very friendly on LinkedIn, and they just are like very likely to leave you replies. So if I post a tweet, I might get 10 to 20 replies on it. My LinkedIn posts will get like 200, 300 sometimes. So
Wow.
it's a platform where I think the algorithm is friendlier at the moment, and just the people are also friendlier also, and generally more interested.
It's very interesting. And you said you have only about 60,000 followers on LinkedIn, correct? So,
Yeah.
how does the views per post compare to Twitter?
Definitely more on LinkedIn,
Really?
kind of by a lot. So
Wow.
on Twitter, you can post as much as you want. You could post 10 times a day and get a lot of impressions on all those posts. On LinkedIn, people don't do more than one or two a day, but per post, it's a lot more. So total impressions wise, I think Twitter's still a bit more for me, but that's because I'm tweeting twice a day and I'm posting on LinkedIn once a day.
So, let's say people are hearing this right now and they're like, wow, like I want to dive in and start creating content on LinkedIn. What are the things that they should know before embarking on that?
Number one, it's roughly the same process as building on Twitter in terms of early on, you're doing a lot of replying and connecting with people and building up that network and those reciprocal relationships rather than just publishing content. Content wise, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to usually want to go a little bit longer on LinkedIn. So if you write a 60-word tweet, you probably want that to be something like 150 words on LinkedIn. So you would copy paste it and then you would add more details, maybe some nuance. You would add maybe like a personal story, whatever you have to do to make it a little bit longer. That's generally going to work out better. And then the LinkedIn equivalent of threads is carousels. So on LinkedIn, you can post a PDF, and that ends up being like a carousel post on Instagram. Those work really, really, really well. So the way I'll do it these days is I'll write a thread and then I'll copy paste and maybe edit a little bit into Canva for a PDF, and then I'll post that PDF on LinkedIn. So basically the same process to build, but longer content works a little bit better. And then you want to turn threads into carousels.
I'm spinning, my wheels are starting to spin, and I'm starting to think of how I can start creating more content, both on Twitter and LinkedIn in general, and thinking about how I could do that in the context of a podcast. Would there be anything that you would advise me on in that process?
Um, I would say mix it up with written and video content. I've seen some people do well with video on LinkedIn. It's more of a platform for writers in general. So, um, you would find out what works best just based on, you post and you get analytics and you figure out what works best for the audience you start building. But the one thing I would say is you probably want to do, some clips from the podcast, but you also want to do some written stuff as well.
And something that has been performing really well for you is talking about AI and how you're leveraging AI into all the stuff that you do. What are some ways that you've been doing that, and how do you see things evolving on that front?
Yeah, I actually just posted about this morning. So the biggest ways I'm using AI is ideas and inspiration, and like a little bit of research as well. So there are a bunch of like very simple prompts you can do. I mean, like the simplest one of all is you say, "Hey, I create social media content about this topic. Can you give me ideas for posts? Give me 20 ideas." So that's like the very simplest one. A lot of them will be generic, which isn't a huge problem. You can take a generic concept and make it unique in the way you write it. Some of them will also be like a little bit less generic, and those are useful too. Another way I do it is I'll plug in a post that did really well for me, and I'll say, write similar posts to this from different angles, and I'll see if any of those are good. A recent one I started doing is write me like 10 sample short social media posts from some big influencer. So a lot of these chatbots aren't going to know about modern people. Like if you put me in, they'd be like, who the hell is that? Um, but you can do people like, Tim Ferriss or like very, very big name people. Like, I like this person. Can you write me some sample posts that they might write? So yeah, there are a ton of ways to use AI to get ideas. I don't love AI generations in terms of copy pasting. I think they're generic. They're often a little bit sloppy, but for getting ideas and like maybe doing like a little bit of research, it's very, very good.
Yeah, and you mentioned there talking about just the it lacks it's not great just uh copy pasting what they write,
Yeah.
and it seems like it lacks soul, and there's a almost like a swagger when a certain writer writes compared to the generic writing that AI would produce. Do you see that changing? Do you think that AI is going to get to a point for us where it can write better than we can write?
Yeah. I'm not a technology expert by any means, but I think that AI will likely pretty soon get good enough to write like informative, helpful blog posts about generic topics. So like you see like a lot on social media, it'll be like threads, like, you know, 10 websites that feel illegal to know about, like kind of like corny stuff like that. I think AI is almost ready to create all that content by itself. It might be ready already. If not, it's soon. Um, what's farthest away from being outsourced to AI is personal brand writing for sure, because you have your personal style that you write with, right? You're writing with your voice, and you also have your past experiences that you're writing about. So that might come in someday, maybe 2, maybe 5 years. I could see it. I don't know. I would say right now the most generic stuff is up next, and then the more personal stuff will be last to be replaced if it does get replaced.
It harps on the importance of building that personal brand and building it in a very genuine, authentic, and vulnerable way, in a way that really connects with people. How do you think you've accomplished that?
Um, just not. not chasing likes and followers. Obviously, I want to create posts that do well, but not chasing likes and followers has been a huge one. I'm thinking, what do I think and what can I help my readers with? Those are my main concerns. So I'm not creating ultra generic content. I'm creating content that is like a mix of my personality and what people want to read. Also, just having actual experiences and talking about them often is probably the biggest one. Right? Like I could write uh, a random like 10 copywriting tips thread, and it would be very generic, not a lot of personality. But if I write something like, I gained 200,000 followers in 2 years, here are 10 tips, like, unconventional tips. And I actually write about things that I've had real experience with. And I can write the tip and then I can write about something that actually happened related to it. It's going to be way more valuable and filled with way more personality than just listing off some very generic recommendations.
That's something that I talked about with Dakota Robertson, and he was saying that on like in a way trying to hit the platitude angle with a very authentic and weird twist has been something that proved to be very authentic, very beneficial for him. Have you thought about doing things in that way? Have you been trying to attack that almost like weird angle?
Not a ton. I feel like I'm just not that quirky of a guy, to be honest. But like I definitely respect that method, and there are ways to, add like a little bit of humor or personality to, like a fairly generic body of the content with like a kind of personality filled hook. That's definitely a way to do it. I don't think I've done that a ton myself. I'll sometimes do like some satirical stuff, like, a little bit of humor. I'm mostly adding personality with experiences, though, rather than like little jokes or things like that.
I read a tweet the other day from a friend who wrote something along the lines of the hardest thing for me is using Twitter to create content and not getting sucked into Twitter at the same time, because it is so addicting, especially when you're
Yeah.
building an account and you're starting to get a bunch of likes, get a bunch of followers, and you keep getting those dopamine hits. It's hard to not get addicted to it. What has your experience been like in terms of your relationship with Twitter on that front?
So I'm the person to talk to on this. When I tell you I haven't browsed my timeline in over a year, I really mean that.
That's crazy.
I do not read the main timeline. So a couple things I'll say. Number one, use Twitter lists. So when you're on your timeline, you're going to be getting tweets from people you actually follow and care about, and then you're going to be getting like, you know, random tweets that they add. It's like a discover page essentially. So there's going to be like meme pages and politics and random stuff. I would stay away from the timeline completely and use lists. So you might have a list of, if you're a writer, you might have a list of other writers. You might have a list of fitness people, a list for this or that. So that's a way to use it more deliberately. And then the other one is just going to be staying off the platform as much as possible. Uh, don't get notifications on your phone. Don't get notifications on desktop. If you need to, use like a website blocker like Freedom app, and that'll just like lock you out of Twitter for a certain amount of time so you can do deep work. But yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is just going to be being on the platform less, whether you have to use apps or you can just, do it by yourself. And then when you're on the platform, use it deliberately. So you're not just checking notifications every 5 minutes. You're saying, I'm going to check notifications at 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. I'm going to reply to people who reply to my posts. I'm going to do some engagement, whatever. But every time you're coming on the platform, you are doing so deliberately rather than just wasting time, going through your timeline over and over and over again.
When it comes to those lists for you and certain writers and people on Twitter that you take inspiration from and look to as a good example of this is a good brand? You mentioned Justin Welch before on LinkedIn. What are some other people on both Twitter and LinkedIn that you look to just for some guidance and inspiration?
Let me try to not leave anybody out. On Twitter, I like Dan Coe a lot. I like Dakota Robertson, who you mentioned. I actually have a bookmark here. I can just read it off to you. Let me see. Um, I like Tim Stoddart, Tim Stodds, Dickie Bush, and Nicholas Cole from Ship 30 are good. Kieran, I forget his last name. He's an English guy. I don't have it on here. And then I like Eddie, War on Weakness. Those are
Mm.
probably my favorite Twitter accounts. I also like George Ten a lot. He's a copywriting guy. And then on LinkedIn, there's a guy named Matt Barker. He's a ghostwriter who I like a lot. Jake Ward does SEO. Justin Welsh, of course. Laura Acosta as a personal brand builder person. So yeah, I mean, I could go on and on. I would say those 10-ish people are the ones who I consume from most, though.
Is there a common why there of why those people stick out to you and why they're able to be those people that you look to?
So I'm basically past like the learning phase of my, not my life, but like my career. Obviously, you keep learning over and over again, but the biggest thing I'm looking for now in my content consumption is ideas for content I'm going to create. So
Yeah.
the biggest reason why I'm drawn to those people is that they just have successful brands. The content they create generally does well. So I consume it a bit so that it exposes me to resonant topics that I can remix and write for myself. Uh, Early on, when I was more in the learning phase, I was drawn to people who created like more in depth how to guide content rather than like very surface level stuff that like feels emotionally resonant but uh, doesn't actually like give you any tactics. So if you're like more in your learning phase, I would say look for people who are giving you like actual valuable information that you can apply and it'll help you, today or within the next few days. If you're more in the creation phase where you're learning a little bit less, gravitate towards people who are also creating high engagement content so you can get ideas from them.
When it comes to your deep work sessions, how do how do you structure that and how do you allow yourself to have that time to come up with original ideas and to really get into that flow state?
The first thing is figuring out what time of day works best for you. So that's in terms of like your energy and focus levels. It's also in terms of just what your schedule is outside of work. I have found that early morning, like 6 to 7 a.m. roughly, and then afternoon, maybe like 1 to 2 are my best time slots. So I guard those time slots basically every single day. I very rarely will sacrifice those to do something else unless it's absolutely essential. So just having time blocks that work for you and actually sitting down to do the work in those time blocks almost every day is important. And then once you're actually doing the work, you need to limit distractions. If you can, turn your phone off or put it on airplane mode or whatever else. Turn off social media and email on your browser. Don't have those tabs open. Um, just, it's just you. If you're writing, you in the piece of paper, whatever your work is, you want it just to be you in that. And then the last thing I'd say on this is um, accept the fact that you're not going to do great work every single day and just do it anyway. So sometimes you're going to do fairly bad work and you're still going to move a tiny step forward. Sometimes you're going to start kind of bad and then once you've gotten into it for 10 minutes, suddenly, you're going to get into that flow state and your focus is going to rise. And then some days are going to be really good. So focus on just sitting down and doing the work without distraction every day. And if you do that, you're going to be in good shape some days.
When it comes to how your days are structured and carving in that work, what takes up most of your time nowadays?
So luckily, because I have a decent sized following now, I'm not spending a lot of time on client acquisition. I used to in the past. Now I don't spend so much time on that. So it's almost all just creation on a day to day basis. So I'll write the most important stuff for my clients, let a guy on my team write the less important stuff. Um, and then probably once a week, I'll look at like the overall strategy um, and see where I'm going wrong, where I can improve. So day to day, it's mostly just creation, and then maybe on a weekly or biweekly basis, I'll take a high level view and see if I want to make high level improvements.
What do you mean by that when you say high level improvements?
All right. So the old cliche is like working on your business versus working in your business. It goes back to that. So there's the day-to-day work that you have to do as a business owner or a freelancer or whatever you do. You know, whatever the work is. For me, that's writing content and making sure my clients, I'm in good contact with them. And then there's working on the business, which is things like how am I going to scale my operations? Do I want to change kind of the angle or the tone of my content? Do I want to add like another income stream? Do I want to create a new product? So there's the low level stuff for daily execution, and then there's the high level stuff that changes your direction.
So when it comes to doing the work on your business, how do you see things evolving in the next few years? What are you doing now that you think will be different 5 years from now?
So my number one goal is to uh, get out of services eventually. I definitely don't dislike being in services, but I would prefer to have um, a recurring revenue source that is more product based. So I'm currently talking to potential co-founders and like technical, like coding agencies about building a SaaS product. I don't totally know what it's going to be quite yet, but optimally in 5 years, I'd be running that or I'd be selling that and like partially retired. So I want to probably get away from services or keep them at a fairly low to moderate level and then focus on product, whether that be a SaaS or maybe a paid newsletter or something else.
For people who don't know, what is SaaS?
So it's an acronym. It stands for software as a service, and it's any software product that you pay a recurring fee on. So the most common ones are like Spotify. You get music from that. Netflix. These are people don't think of those as SaaSes, but they basically are. And then you have a bunch of like business type tools. So Buffer is a SaaS. It posts on social media for you. I use Tweet Hunter for Twitter. That's a SaaS. So it's any like software slash technology tool that you get recurring revenue from.
Tweet Hunter is a big one that has popped off in recent years, and it seems to add a lot of value for content creators. Has that been something that's been super beneficial for you?
Yeah, I use Tweet Hunter and their sister company Taplio, which
Oh,
is for LinkedIn. Um, so yeah, they have solid tools all around. The one I like most is the content inspiration tools. So when you go on Tweet Hunter or Taplio, you go to a certain tab and they generate viral tweets that you can get inspiration from just based on the engagement of the tweet, of course, but also on the topics you write about. And then they also have little swipe files. So you can go to, marketing and sales or self improvement, whatever else. And there is a selection of posts on there. So my favorite aspect of those tools is that they're just really good swipe files and um, they're like living swipe files almost because you can just press a button and it can generate more swipes for you. So yeah, there's all kinds of great tools with those, but I like the inspiration aspect best.
do you ever use the tweet performance prediction feature where it gives you like a percentage of how it thinks you'll do in comparison to other content?
A little bit. I wouldn't, if I feel good about a post, I'm not going to delete it because that, whatever that AI is, says it's going to be unsuccessful. But it's nice when it says it's going to be successful. It's like
Great point.
confirms my suspicion essentially. And then, I'll occasionally tweak it a little bit. Like Tweet Hunter, it'll say like okay, above average, great, or whatever words it uses. So sometimes when it's just okay, I'll think like, like maybe I can shorten this line, maybe I can make this hook a little bit better and more concise. So it's like not something that I follow closely, but it's nice to have like a kind of a virtual second pair of eyes that just makes me either question what I'm doing a little bit or makes me think, okay, I'm on the right track here.
And for those that don't know, in Tweet Hunter, you can type in a tweet and it will give you a percentage out of 100 of how it thinks it will perform compared to your other tweets. So if it's a 95, it says that means it will perform 95, or it will be better than 95% of your other tweets. Has it been pretty accurate for you?
I haven't uh, been so focused on that I've like measured it. Yeah, I use it minimally. I would say it's a nice thing to have, but it's not something I've looked into a ton.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Taplio, is that pretty much the same thing just for LinkedIn? Is there any big difference?
No, not a big difference at all. They're basically the same tool for a different platform. I believe they started off as different companies, and now they are the same company. They're under the same umbrella because of some sort of acquisition. But yeah, they're essentially the same tool. It just depends on which platform you care about more.
And Charles, before we end here, is there anything that we didn't touch on today that you would either like to touch on or something you don't get asked about often that you would like to talk about?
Yeah, well, I so when I recently recorded this digital product that I released about a month ago, the last section of it was about mindset and sticking with it and all that. And the biggest thing I want to um, urge to people is just expect failure, like a lot of failure. That is essentially the default state of every content creator for sure, and it's basically the default state of just every person on Earth. Um, 9 out of 10 posts or more are not going to be very good. 9 out of 10 cold DMs you send are not going to be good, or a lot more than that, maybe even 95 or 99%. So focus on your habits and what the inputs are. Um, focus on, if you have a plan, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z every day. Focus on just executing on those things. Don't think about the outcome as much, because there's just going to be a lot of failure no matter what level you're at. And you have to expect that and be okay with that.
It's a great message. And, failure is such a part of everything, and it makes the story a good story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Charles, thank you so much for this today. I know that everyone got a ton of value out of this. We have a comment here saying something along the lines of, please keep this up on your timeline and don't delete it. It's immensely beneficial. So I think people really enjoyed this today, and I know I definitely did.
Yeah, man, I had a good time. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you guys for listening.